Okay, so basically this is just a short Mythbuster style do things work. So I actually had two things I wanted to do for this video. Discussing just certain weaponry that, well, actually, first thing I'm going to do is just talk about HE and AP. There's been a discussion about bouncing rounds. So I'm not sure if everyone's aware of this, but when you fire AP and it bounces, you can actually see the AP bounce off. So I'm going to go ahead and drive up to a Yamato, and basically, normally AP can do four things. It can not penetrate, which does no damage. This can either be because it gets flat on stopped by armor, or it ricochets off because it's too sheer for it to actually penetrate. It can over penetrate, which means it goes right through. Most happens against destroyers and does 10% damage. It can penetrate and then detonate inside the ship for 30% damage. And then there's the Citadel hits, which are 100% of the damage, which is when you hit like the boiler through the armor or a magazine on the larger ships. So the question isn't really about what AP, whether or not AP bounces. We all know that AP can ricochet, and some of you might even know that the AP is actually modeled to bounce off ships when it ricochets. So I'm going to go ahead and fire some HE here, so you can see that the HE is red. I can't believe I missed the ship that's standing still, but I'm going to go ahead and fire some AP here, and hopefully it'll cooperate. And when it hits, you can see it bounces off, and I don't know why it's a purple round, but basically what happens is the round is unable to penetrate, and well, that one actually penetrated, but it basically just glances off the ship and does no damage when it bounces. And that's just a nice feature that actually happens for the rounds in the game for AP. So you can see here, this is a really sheer shot into the side armor. They all just bounce off. Now the question is whether or not HE can bounce. Now I believe a lot of people here have played Navy Fields. There's a terminology thing where bouncing is considered also just doing no damage. It might not actually be a physical bounce, but whether or not it bounces, it's up to the player. So we're going to try and get as sheer of an angle as possible to see if the HE round will actually just deflect off. And it looks like, you know, like we can hit it, but it doesn't count as it like actual damage. now let's talk about HE fire OP. Now, but basically you can see that if you angle the ship at a certain angle for, like, if you're aiming at an armored part of the ship, you might actually get hits for HE that detonate, but they bounce and do no damage technically because the angle is too sheer or there's too much armor. So all the HE is exploding, but it can do fire. We haven't done any actual damage to the side of the Yamato yet, but basically if you want to actually do damage on larger ships with the HE, I've noticed that in recent patches people are like, we've been doing less damage with HE rounds or something, or like lots of damage with fire. You have to aim for the top parts of the ship, the superstructure, where there's no armor. So these two rounds, oh my gosh, it's doing a lot of fires. My Yamato might not last very long through this testing, but you can see shooting the top part of the ship gives us some damage numbers, as expected, but shooting the sides where there's all this armor results in the quote-unquote bounce, where the HE is basically just flattening against the armor and doing no damage to the ship. Now, whether or not AP can bounce if it's too low of a caliber, like on a direct hit, I think it literally just gets stopped. Yeah, so, well, actually that punched through. Actually, I wonder. Yeah, it looks like that just literally stopped it right here. But like in some places, I'm able to shoot through. That shot through. But yeah, basically, HE can quote-unquote bounce when we're using the standard terminology of bouncing means no damage. It doesn't actually ricochet like the AP does that you saw earlier. I'll get another shot here. Maybe on this Yamato. Hopefully it'll bounce off. But basically, the same effect happens where the rounds are doing no damage because of armor. And what happens to the round when it bounces depends on how you're shooting it and what you're shooting with. But basically, all we can establish is that if your rounds are doing no damage, it's because that they're being fired at an angle where they can't do any damage. So, technically speaking, the first myth is that do HE rounds bounce? Technically, yes. Graphically speaking, they do not ricochet off like like AP rounds do. But fundamentally speaking, they do the same results to the ship, is no damage, even though it's a hit on the ship structure itself. So the next thing that people have been talking about is torpedo minimum firing range. Now, if you look at this little arc thing, you see this little green area. And this green area is obviously your arc. Now, I've heard a lot of people saying there's no minimum firing range for destroyers. And based on observation, there is. I'm going to try and get as close as possible to this ship without touching it, because collision damage is on, even in training. And I don't want to die tragically. It's going to be a little tough. Little hard for me to steer this thing. I'm going to try and just scoot in here. The minimum firing range of torpedoes isn't very significant, but it is there. So you can't just drive up next to a Yamato, like, and then say, kapew, kapew, instant kill. You can't dodge this. Here we go. Come on, stop. Okay, we're going to go ahead and fire these torpedoes. No damage. There's a minimum firing range. I'm going to back up a tad here. So we got a lot of the Yamato in range here. So you can see that as soon as it reaches the arc, then you can start hitting. But basically, if you try and fire within the arc, you can actually see the arc vanishing. It does nothing. So basically, the goal is to fire so your torpedoes are within the visible arcs and not like point blank range. You can't just do like toss torpedoes on board the other ship. That won't do any damage to the other ship. So we're going to go ahead and try and get a half and half here. Hopefully without touching it and exploding. Okay. So what should happen here is 2 torpedoes should hit and one of them should bounce off and not do any damage. So here we go. Let's hope it's right. Yep, 2 hits and the third one was not active. So this arc here that you see is actually the arming range. So if we do it like this, it should only be 1 hit, the far left torpedo. Wow, it's not even that. Actually, it might be a little more than that now I think about it. I think it's just really close there in such a way that it didn't count. But yeah, you want to aim in such a way that the torpedoes hit outside the arc. If it's within the arc, you won't hit and basically will do nothing. And yeah, that's really a great way for you to waste torpedoes. If you're like in a DD fight with another DD and you drive too close to them, your torpedoes aren't going to do anything. So you can actually, like, if you're fighting another DD and you know about this, you can try and scoot in there as much as possible, make them fire torpedoes, and then dud into you. And then as you're driving away from each other after a parallel, just nuke them. So we're gonna try it one more time. This should be 2 hits. Oh, 3 hits. I guess it's a little finicky, but basically, as long as they're within the yellow place, or as long as they're within the arc, you should be fine for hits. If they're inside the arc, you might get some of these duds. So basically, just focus on trying to get the ship firing torpedoes so that they'll hit the ship outside the firing arc of your torpedoes. Actually, it might be related to the fact that the arcs are shared between torpedo tubes. So the rear tubes obviously have a little more time to arm. But I guess the best way to say it is, as guidance, is just to use the external arc plus maybe a few pixels to get your hits, because each of these individual torpedo tubes has different firing arcs. Look, you can switch between them to see the different firing arcs, but I'm not sure if you can actually switch through all of them if there's like 3 of them. Also, I'm really close to the ship. Let's go ahead and touch. Wow! I didn't realize that you could actually touch a ship and survive. That's something else for Mythbusters. There's a way to survive a collision if you literally just touch them, but it does a lot of damage. All right, so that was just the 2 miss plus the extra one is HE technically bounces. Torpedoes do have a minimum firing range, and if you gently nudge a ship, you will take damage, but you won't instantly detonate like all the glorious videos of collisions are.